Hi Year 6, it's Mr. Harris here, bringing you Tuesday's literacy lesson. I'm trying something slightly different today, trying to use my phone to record the video because I'm hoping that it's better quality. We'll see what happens. I hope it all goes well. Okay, we are going to be looking at chapter 21 and 22 of Black Beauty. So I'm just going to turn and look at the screen, and I hope you can see that. I'll probably be a bit shaky with my hands. Before we start, we're going to look at the answers from last week. So, which word is closest to ignorant in this sentence? The word closest was uninformed. And the sentence that uses ignorance correctly is the teacher was suspicious of the boy's ignorance about the argument in the playground. So, him not knowing about the argument in the playground. Ginger and Merrylegs were moved because Black Beauty was sensitive to their sounds while she was ill. Tom Green was helping John care for Black Beauty because Joe felt broken-hearted about what had happened. And John was not speaking with Joe because John was worried for Black Beauty. It's false that John thought ignorance was an acceptable excuse for Joe's mistake. He didn't like that at all. He didn't think that saying you just don't know is the right reason, is a good reason to do something wrong, I suppose, or incorrectly. Joe Green was able to ride Ginger and Merrylegs rarely. The cart driver in the brickyard was cruel. To stop the man flogging the horse, Joe told Mr. Clay. The punishment the man they thought he would get for his treatment of the horse was 2 to 3 months in prison. And by the end of the chapter, Joe was more confident. He wasn't more cocky, you may have thought that. But cocky and arrogant, I suppose that's a bit like being confident, but showing off more, and maybe falsely, without due reason to be more confident. Okay, a couple of words today just to look at. A reminder, we had in the earlier chapters looked at a check rein. So this is a special type of rein that's put on a horse that makes their head stay up high. It's deemed as cruel in some parts because the horse doesn't have freedom of movement. The word parting is the chapter 21 name of the chapter. This means goodbye. So like a parting is a goodbye. And accustomed is if you get used to things. So I suppose, children, maybe you're getting accustomed to not being at school, but that makes me sad. Okay, I am going to move on now to read the chapter, and there'll be some true or false questions for you to answer. Please bear with me, I should have been on the right spot before this, but I want to get to the start of chapter 21. And I'm hopeful I will be able to read it and you will be able to see it. So, chapter 21, The Parting. Now I had lived in this happy place 3 years, but sad changes were about to come over us. We heard from time to time that our mistress was ill. The doctor was often at the house, and the master looked grave and anxious. Then we heard that she must leave her home at once and go to a warm country for 2 or 3 years. The news fell upon the household like the tolling of a death bell. Everybody was sorry, but the master began directly to make arrangements for breaking up his establishment and leaving England. We used to hear it talked about in our stable. Indeed, nothing else was talked about. John went about his work silent and sad, and Joe scarcely whistled. There was a great deal of coming and going. Ginger and I had full work. The first of the party who went were Miss Jessie and Flora with their governess. They came to bid us goodbye. They hugged poor Merrylegs like an old friend, and so indeed he was. Then we heard what had been arranged for us. Master had sold Ginger and me to his old friend, the Earl of Wessex, for he thought we should have a good place there. Merrylegs he had given to the vicar, who was wanting a pony for Mrs. Blomefield, but it was on the condition that he should never be sold, and that when he was past work he should be shot and buried. Joe was engaged to take care of him and to help in the house, so I thought that Merrylegs was well off. John had the offer of several good places, but he said he should wait a little and look around. The evening before they left, the master came into the stable to give some directions and to give his horses the last pat. He seemed very low-spirited. I knew that by his voice. I believe we horses can tell more by the voice than many men can. "Have you decided what to do, John?" he said. "I find you have not accepted either of those offers." "No, sir. I have made up my mind that if I could get a situation with some first-rate colt breaker and horse trainer, it would be the right thing for me. Many young animals are frightened and spoiled by wrong treatment, which need not be if the right man took them in hand. I always get on well with horses, and if I could help some of them to a fair start, I should feel as if I was doing some good. What do you think of it, sir?" "I don't know a man anywhere," said master, "that I should think so suitable for it as yourself. You understand horses, and somehow they understand you, and in time you might set up for yourself. I think you could not do better. If in any way I can help you, write to me. I shall speak to my agent in London and leave your character with him." Master gave John the name and address, and then he thanked him for his long and faithful service. But that was too much for John. "Pray, don't, sir. I can't bear it. You and my dear mistress have done so much for me that I could never repay it. But we shall never forget you, sir, and please God, we may some day see mistress back again like herself. We must keep up hope, sir." Master John gave John his hand, but he did not speak, and they both left the stable. The last sad day had come, and the footman and the heavy luggage had gone off the day before, and there were only master and mistress and her maid. Ginger and I brought the carriage up to the hall door for the last time. The servants brought out cushions and rugs and many other things, and when all were arranged, master came down the steps carrying the mistress in his arms. I was on the side to the house and can see all that went on. He placed her carefully in the carriage while the house servants stood round crying. "Goodbye again," he said. "We shall not forget any of you," and he got in. "Drive on, John." Joe jumped up and we trotted slowly through the park and through the village, where the people were standing at their doors to have a last look and to say, "God bless them." When we reached the railway station, I think mistress walked from the carriage to the waiting room. I heard her say in her own sweet voice, "Goodbye, John. God bless you." I felt the rein twitch, but John made no answer. Perhaps he could not speak. As soon as Joe had taken the things out of the carriage, John called him to stand by the horses while he went on the platform. Poor Joe! He stood close up to our heads to hide his tears. Very soon the train came puffing up to the station. Then 2 or 3 minutes and the doors were slammed to. The guard whistled, and the train glided away, leaving behind it only clouds of white smoke and some very heavy hearts. When I was quite out of sight, John came back. "We shall never see her again," he said. "Never." He took the reins, mounted the box, and with Joe drove slowly home. But it was not our home now. Okay, children, so that is actually the end of part 1. That was chapter 22. And we can see there that they were ending what was a happy time for those horses. And we're going into a bit of a period of unknown. So we're going to now read chapter 22, Earls Hall. The next morning after breakfast, Joe put Merrylegs into the mistress's low chaise to take him to the vicarage. He came first and said goodbye to us, and Merrylegs neighed to us from the yard. Then John put the saddle on Ginger and the leading rein on me, and rode us across the country about 15 miles to Earls Hall Park, where the Earl of Wessex lived. There was a very fine house and a great deal of stabling. We went into the yard through a stone gateway, and John asked for Mr. York. It was some time before he came. He was a fine-looking, middle-aged man, and his voice said at once that he expected to be obeyed. He was very friendly and polite to John, and after giving us a slight look, he called the groom to take us to our boxes and invited John to take some refreshment. We were taken to a light, airy stable and placed in boxes adjoining each other, where we were rubbed down and fed. In about half an hour, John and Mr. York, who was to be our new coachman, came in to see us. "Now, Mr. Manley," he said, after carefully looking at us both, "I can see no fault in these horses, but we all know that horses have their peculiarities as well as men, and that sometimes they need different treatment. I should like to know if there is anything particular in either of these that you would like to mention." "Well," said John, "I don't believe there is a better pair of horses in the country, and right grieved I am to part with them. But they are not alike. The black one is the most perfect temper I ever knew. I suppose he has never known a hard word or a blow since he was foaled, and all his pleasure seems to be to do what you wish. But the chestnut, I fancy, must have had bad treatment. We heard as much from the dealer. She came to us snappish and suspicious, but when she found what sort of a place ours was, it all went off by degrees. For 3 years I have never seen the smallest sign of temper, and if she is well treated, there is not a better, more willing animal than she is. But she is naturally a more irritable constitution than the black horse. Flies tease her more, anything wrong in the harness frets her more, and if she were ill used or unfairly treated, she would not be unlikely to give tit for tat. You know that many high-mettled horses will do so." "Of course," said York, "I quite understand, but you know it is not easy in stables like these to have all the grooms just what they should be. I do my best, and there I must leave it. I'll remember what you have said about the mare." They were going out to the stable when John stopped and said, "I had better mention that we had never used the check rein with either of them. The black horse never had one on, and the dealer said it was the gag bit that spoiled the other's temper." "Well," said York, "if they come here, they must wear the check rein. I prefer a loose rein myself, and his lordship is always very reasonable about horses. But my lady, that's another thing. She will have style, and if her carriage horses are not reined up tight, she wouldn't look at them. I always stand out against the gag bit, and shall do so, but it must be tight up when my lady rides." "I am sorry for it, very sorry," said John, "but I must go now, or I shall lose the train." He came round to each of us to pat and speak to us for the last time. His voice sounded very sad. I held my face close to him. That was all I could do to say good-bye, and then he was gone, and I have never seen him since. The next day Lord Wessex came to look at us. He seemed pleased with our appearance. "I have great confidence in these horses," he said, "from the character my friend Mr. Gordon has given me of them. Of course, they are not a match in colour, but my idea is that they will do very well in the carriage while we are in the country. Before we go to London, I must try to match Baron. The black horse, I believe, is perfect for riding." York then told him what John had said about us. "Well," said he, "you must keep an eye to the mare, and put the check rein easy. I dare say they will do very well with a little humouring at first. I'll mention it to your lady." In the afternoon we were harnessed and put in the carriage, and as the stable clock struck 3, we were led round to the front of the house. It was all very grand, and 3 or 4 times as large as the old house at Birtwick, but not half so pleasant, if a horse may have an opinion. 2 footmen were standing ready, dressed in drab livery, with scarlet breeches and white stockings. Presently we heard the rustling sound of silk as my lady came down the flight of stone steps. She stepped round to look at us. She was a tall, proud-looking woman, and did not seem pleased about something, but she said nothing, and got into the carriage. This was the first time of wearing a check rein, and I must say, though it certainly was a nuisance not to be able to get my head down now and then, it did not pull my head higher than I was accustomed to carry it. I felt anxious about Ginger, but she seemed to be quiet and content. The next day at 3 o'clock we were again at the door, and the footman, as before, We heard the silk dress rustle and the lady came down the steps, and in an imperious voice she said, "York, you must put those horses' heads higher. They are not fit to be seen." York got down and said very respectfully, "I beg your pardon, my lady, but these horses have not been reined up for 3 years, and my lord said it would be safer to bring them to it by degrees. But if your ladyship pleases, I can take them up a little more." "Do so," she said. York came round to our heads and shortened the rein himself. 1 hole, I think. Every little makes a difference, be it for better or worse, and that day we had a steep hill to go up. Then I began to understand what I had heard of. Of course I wanted to put my head forward and take the carriage up with a will, as we had been used to do, but no, I had to pull with my head up now, and that took all the spirit out of me, and the strain came on my back and legs. When we came in, Ginger said, "Now you see what it is like, but this is not bad, and if it does not get much worse, then I shall say nothing about it, for we are very well treated here. But if they strain me up tight, why, let 'em look out. I can't bear it, and I won't." Day by day, hole by hole, our beating reins were shortened, and instead of looking forward with pleasure to having my harness put on, as I used to do, I began to dread it. Ginger, too, seemed restless, though she said very little. At last I thought the worst was over. For several days there was no more shortening, and I determined to make the best of it and do my duty, though it was now a constant harass instead of a pleasure. But the worst was not to come. Okay, children, so that's the end of chapter 21 and chapter 22. We've got to part 2 of the book. You have got some true or false questions to do on Purple Mash. So there's a quiz for you to do, but there's also the questions are here. So they are the questions from chapter 21. Here are the true or false questions from chapter 22. And children, there's a challenge there. Explain why your answers are true or false. Use evidence from the text. So number 1 is true or false, because on page, whatever page it might be, it states. So that will be giving some evidence. You can send any of those in to the Year 6 email group. Okay, we'll see how this video has gone. Enjoy those next 2 chapters, and I'll see you tomorrow.